Chapter 5. Damsel in Distress Not. Splash, splash, splash. Hector scrambled to get out of the mud trap, slipping on the slick sides and sinking deeper into the muck. It clogged his mouth and nose, tasting horrible. He choked and gasped for breath. He could hear May cheering her win on the other side of the wall. Did she just play dirty to win? Hector thought as he frantically sloshed around in the thick mud, trying to wriggle out. It was harder than it looked. The mud trap was designed to keep racers, trapped. The other kids would catch up soon. How could she do that to him? Sure, sabotage was technically allowed in these races, but it wasn't considered good sportsmanship. Hector would never play dirty like that. Sure, his family wanted the Zeus Cup, but they wouldn't approve of him cheating. Hurry up! Get out of there! Phil yelled at him from the sidelines. His face was flushed and angry. You've still got a chance to place. But other kids were racing past him, jumping over the mud pit and onto the climbing wall. Hector wanted to give up, but he heard his brother's voice. He couldn't quit now. He summoned the last of his strength. Hector scrambled harder, finally wriggling his way out of the mud trap. But he was soaked and covered head to toe in muck. He probably looked like some kind of swamp creature. His favorite uniform was ruined. Somehow, though slipping and sliding the whole way, Hector made it up the wall and down the other side. All he had to do now was sprint to the finish. His shoes squished with each step, oozing mud and making it impossible to run at his usual speed. Squish, squish, squish went in his shoes. Thump, thump, thump went his heart. He was exhausted from his struggle and completely winded. Hector limped over the finish line, placing a distant 10th. He was filthy and soaking wet and out of breath, but beyond livid. This wasn't fair, not by a long shot. How could she? His eyes locked onto May as she accepted the blue ribbon for placing first in the preliminary race. It wasn't the Zeus Cup, thankfully, and they'd both qualified for the big race. But it still stung to lose, especially like that. You got distracted, didn't you? Phil said, coming over with his clipboard. He slapped it on his leg in disappointment. It's what I'm always warning you about in training. When are you going to learn to focus? But she cheated, Hector whined. She tricked me to win. That's not an excuse, Phil said with a frown. If you'd stayed focused on your own race and not worried about her, this wouldn't have happened. You should have listened to me. But it's not fair, Hector said in a petulant voice, slumping down in defeat. He could taste mud on his tongue. It dripped down his face. Frustrated tears pricked his eyes. Hector, you need to take responsibility for your loss, Phil said. That's the only way you're going to learn and improve before the big race. You can't blame the girl. It's your fault. With one more pointed look, Phil left him alone to go talk to his parents in the stands. They watched him with gloomy expressions. He'd let them down, all down. Hector limped over to his bag and pulled out a towel, trying to clean himself off, but all he could do was smear the mud around. He felt humiliated, but also furious. Despite what his brother said about taking responsibility, he still felt cheated. He was just trying to be nice, and he'd been punished for it. Hector glanced up and spotted May off to the side of the track with her father, grinning and preening. The blue ribbon hung around her neck. That ribbon should have been mine, Hector thought angrily. He had been beating her fair and square before she pulled that dirty trick on the wall. The only reason he lost was because she pretended to be a damsel in distress, even though she didn't actually need help. It was all a ruse, plain and simple, and he fell for it like a fool. Before he knew what he was doing, he started toward her to confront her about what she'd done. Anger propelled him across the field, shooting through his muscles like fire. But then, May's father yanked the blue ribbon from her neck, crumbled it up, and threw it down on the ground. You don't deserve this, he barked at her, angrily tapping his clipboard. You fell short of your top time. You're slacking off out there. Hector stopped in his tracks, shocked. Her dad was lecturing her, even though she'd won? May looked crestfallen. She scrambled to pick up the ribbon, crumbled and dirty as it was. I'm sorry, Papa, she said, looking down at her shoes in shame. You almost lost to that boy, her father went on. You're just lucky he got distracted. Next time, you won't be so fortunate. The big race is next week. I know, May said, blinking to hold back her tears. I promise. I'll train harder in our backyard course. No, we're hitting the public track again, her father continued. Clearly you got distracted because you're not used to racing in front of other people. So that explained why Hector hadn't seen her training before this week. She had her own private training course. Winning the Zeus Cup is important for your future, her father asserted. Don't you want to win a track scholarship to college? As her father continued to lecture her about focusing harder on her training, Hector realized they had a lot more in common than he imagined. Now he understood why she pulled that dirty trick on the wall. She felt pressured from her family to win, just like he did. Sure, he wouldn't have played dirty like that, but he understood why she did. Slowly his anger subsided and morphed into something else. Sympathy. He felt bad for her because he knew exactly what that felt like. Making sure that nobody was watching, Hector pulled his camera out of his bag. He aimed it at May and focused on her face as she swiped at her eyes, wiping sweat away. He zoomed in closer and focused the lens. It wasn't sweat dripping down her cheeks. She was crying. He felt another surge of emotion as he studied her face. Snap, snap, snap. He captured a few quick pictures, then he turned away to examine the images. The sun glinted in his eyes, distorting the screen. Suddenly, he felt someone grab his shoulder. Hey, what do you think you're doing?